Thank you.
I'm Farooq Khan. I'm going to be moderating this panel. I run an artificial intelligence cognitive AI company called Inference Analytics based out of Chicago. And it's my pleasure to have with me three very esteemed and very successful people who have an association with analytics and AI. So I'm going to give a quick intro to them, and then I'm going to let them talk a little bit about who they are. So first, to my right, Omar Abdullah. Omar Abdullah is co-founder and managing director of the SmartCube. You can read his bio, but he's going to talk a little bit about what he's done and how he's been successful. Next to him, we've got Charlie Kwan. Charlie is managing partner and co-founder of Consitor. And Rahil Ratiwala, who is director of digital business strategy at Blue Metal. So with that, I'd like to sort of dive directly into the entrepreneurship element of this, right? So we're talking about AI, and we're going to get to AI. But first, let's talk about, what it takes to be an entrepreneur, right? So with that, why don't we start with Omar, right? Omar, you've built a company that is 700 people. You're a co-founder of that company. So tell us about your experience as a founder of SmartCube.
Everybody hear me? All right. Good afternoon, folks. I'm Omar Abdullah. I'm one of the founders of the SmartCube. Maybe I'll start with a little bit of a background around kind of where I came from and why we started the firm. I moved to Chicago. I actually grew up in Hong Kong, originally from Pakistan, grew up in Hong Kong, moved here in '93 to do my MBA, and then went into management consulting for almost 10 years. And one of the things that I heard regularly when I worked in management consulting was a lot of our clients would come to me and say, hey, Mr. Consultant, when I work with you, I get two things. I get research and analytics, which is great, and I get advice. You tell me what I should be doing. And what I heard from a lot of clients was, love the research and analytics, but I don't always need the advice because I have people who can make some of those decisions. I need them to placate the consultants that are in the room, because a lot of you are friends of mine. I need that when I have specific targeted issues. But fundamentally, my people need help in terms of getting analytics and research done on an ongoing basis. And I'd love to be able to get that without having to pay several $1,000s a day. And so at the time, this is back in the early 2000s, my business school roommate, who also worked at my consulting firm with me, we had an idea to say, what if we started providing information, intelligence, insight using a global analyst team? And we said, well, what if we started with 5 smart folks in a place like India who are trained in various methodologies from a research, from an intelligence, from an analytics perspective, and also functionally trained, and teach them to solve business problems for our clients on an ongoing basis. And that's what we started with back in 2003, 2004 out of the US. And we started with 5 people. We've grown it today to where we have 720 people around the world, primarily still out of India and Romania, and really focused on a few different areas: procurement and supply chain, strategy and M&A, and financial research being our prime focus areas. So that's been kind of the core struggle. But a lot of what we've heard today resonates very much. I mean, I left my old consulting firm on a Friday, leaving behind my first-class travel and my fancy office. I had 2 kids at the time, 4 and 6 months old, and with this stupid idea to start a business, just madness. And Monday morning, I sat at my desk with a laptop and nothing else, thinking, okay, what the hell do I do now? And but you figure it out. You build on it along the way. And since then, we've really kind of gone level after level. Started market intelligence, and then over the years moved into analytics, data analytics in particular. And we can talk a little bit more about that kind of as we go forward. But that's sort of the 2-minute version of the SmartCube story.
Thank you. Thanks so much. All right, Charlie. So you want to tell us about Neodesic and your experience in launching that company?
Yeah. Sure. So my background is, again, it's a combination of consulting. I've started up a number of venture-backed companies, as well as worked in large corporations as head of strategy at new ventures. My third company was Neodesic. It was in 1996. Internet was starting to grow, and I had met some PhD and a professor at University of Chicago that was doing a lot of not machine learning, but natural language understanding, and some bot technology. And initially, our business was focused on actually using natural language understanding and bot technology, which is pretty prevalent now, but this is 1996. We were going to use that as a web-based customer support to basically reduce the cost and the volume to the call centers. So that was kind of the business model. We quickly pivoted a number of times. And that's one of the things I learned as an entrepreneur. The thing that you have to always focus on is constantly focused on the customer segment that you're going after. And as the market and dynamics change, you need to be able to be agile, adapt, and be persistent, because you're going to always modify these things. Finally, when we ended up so this is by 2000. So if you remember the dot-com boom, 2000 was when the bubble burst. So just before that, the B2C dot-com bubble had burst. We were ready to sign $20 million on a Series B, on a $40 million pre-valuations, on developing a marketplace for small to medium-sized truck fleets so they can actually aggregate their purchase power. And we're using our natural language robotic understanding to basically pull together all the knowledge. So that drove the decision makers and brought that in. So just before we were ready to close on that round, the bubble just was really bad. So we had to basically take some VC and then sell the company ultimately. But the key lessons from there, I think, was that you have to be persistent. And then the other thing that I also realized was that as a CEO, you can't be the bottleneck. You can't take on any task, because your primary focus is to get the entire organization focused on how to achieve that. And you're always focusing on removing barriers, making sure that you resolve conflict so the entire ecosystem moves forward. If you actually have to take on a position and take on a piece of work, you're the bottleneck, because everyone's going to look at you, and you have more important things to do. What I found was I didn't really like that as much. I like doing things. So that's kind of my big background on the whole consulting and entrepreneur experience.
Right here. Yeah. Go ahead.
How's that? Can you hear me? All right. So I started off actually, I was born in India, in Mumbai, and moved out here to the US to do a bachelor degree in finance. I'd always been interested in going to Wall Street. But just before the internet boom started happening in about 98 timeframe, and I graduated, anybody was being picked up to go in IT, right? So I said, why not? And I joined the IT bandwagon. And by 2000, I had my first startup in building a marketplace for connecting marketers with people who want to buy marketing services. And this was just in May of 2000, just like a month or two before, the big crash happened. But luckily, I had done some interesting work in the first 2 years of my career, and ended up at Microsoft building software. Ended up actually in the business intelligence team of Microsoft, first selling business intelligence to enterprises, and then eventually leading a sales team in Boston, in Massachusetts, with running about a $40 million business, back then, and eventually moved to Redmond, where I actually became one of the product managers for the SQL Server product team at Microsoft. Now, what that did, I thought, gave me a good perspective of building software, right? Selling it, marketing it, figuring it out, leading sales teams. 9 years later, I said, you know what, I'm ready to actually branch out and start my own thing, which I did, and I saw the need, this is about in 2010, the need for actually real-time information. Back then, batch processing of data, analytics after the fact was still happening quite a bit. And the technologies like Hadoop and things like that you may hear about were just taking shape. So I really wanted to solve this idea of real-time insights. And I started a company, built a real-time platform, and realized very quickly that without this whole idea of having a core problem that you're trying to solve, specifically in industry, actually knowing that industry problem would go nowhere. And it became very difficult for me initially, but I actually ended up partnering with folks that knew about the telecom business, because I felt that they seemed to have the most biggest problem, because Facebook had just turned on the ability for people to, Facebook would automatically play a video. If you ever used Facebook, like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it would not play the video for you automatically. You had to press the play button. But now, if you just scroll, it just starts playing. But if you're AT&T, that's not good, right? Because your whole network is like being chowed down by people, playing videos on Facebook. So anyway, I figured that would be an interesting thing. And we ended up actually working with AT&T and Vodafone in the UK and British Telecom and Ericsson in helping them understand how to take that real-time information about call, about video performance, and actually understand where the bottlenecks are. And for me, that was a true eye-opener because it just felt real once you actually understood someone's problem deep enough. And as I started adapting or applying that technology, because it was a horizontal technology, and most of you who are in the business of creating software will realize that horizontal technology can be applied. Your thinking is, horizontal technology can be applied in any industry, but it's very difficult to sell. And that's what's happening with me was I was convinced somebody to do a proof of concept, but never actually buy it and get it running in production. And the reason for that was because I didn't understand the reasons why they would not or would buy. And I felt that I didn't really have the industry experience on the business operations side that helped me gain that insight into what decisions an executive makes, a senior vice president or a CEO of a company, that they're going to invest $10 million this year on this particular program that's going to take advantage of AI or advanced analytics. So I ended up actually coming to Chicago for that. I took a role at Motorola here that made me responsible for transforming Motorola's $3 billion service business by using AI and machine learning and data. And in that role, I had to convince the private equity firm that invested in Motorola, as well as the CEO of Motorola, that this is the right thing to do. And that gave me the insights to then, now with the blue metal, that's what I do with many other clients. So I've in my career always tried to go in and out of industry, starting companies and going back in industry, gaining the experience that I felt had the gap, and then applying it to successfully lead. The company that I was talking about, the data company, actually ended up selling it to another company in the UK, and I did a lot of work there eventually, but still kept feeling that you need to go and get and understand the deep problems before you bring something to market. So.
Okay, so just a general theme, and it's interesting you draw upon this, right, Rehan, that it's through data, right? You being in analytics, business intelligence, that you've kind of naturally, evolved into like looking at AI. So with that as the backdrop, right, I'm going to ask Charlie this question, right? So do you think AI is dramatically different than what people are doing with big data, with analytics, business intelligence, data warehousing? Do you think it's dramatically different, or at least cognitive AI as we call it, right? So give us your take.
So when I was an undergrad, AI was the real big thing. But what we found was that, like Rahil said, one of the key things is identifying that use case. Because if you can't find a tangible business value, it's very hard to use that technology to actually solve a problem. So a lot of people generally say, well, wouldn't it be great if you had an AI platform that can kind of think? So when I look back in terms of my Neodesic days, when we actually had natural language understanding, we had bot technology, but we also didn't have some of the fundamental technologies that exist today, which is kind of the big data, the ability to basically parse and do the large scale compute. So the ability to actually get data, the ability to integrate them and to do the analytics has improved substantially, including doing unstructured text, video, voice, and by bringing it all together, it's almost like. So when you actually think about, I think the best example is taking a little kid. They're getting all these signals. They're getting like, it's hot, it's cold, I'm hearing noise, I'm seeing all these lights in my eyes, I smell stuff, I taste stuff, but I can't make sense out of it. But over time, what happens is, so when I think about what big data has done, it basically has reduced the cost of computational power. So it's slower, but basically it's your brain, and by crunching these numbers, and over time, if you have the right level of guidance, or even unguidance, machine learning basically allows you to do that, you can start to pick up patterns and provide context. And then when you have business leaders that can say, I can kind of see this, and I can apply it to a specific use case, like identifying fraud, or identifying security breaches, or identifying a variety of different things, then that becomes powerful. And I think, so you asked me, is this kind of evolutionary, or are there some major steps and transformational? I have to say that it needed these transformational steps like the big data, Hadoop, and MapReduce to get it to a level where it's cost effective to address some of these pieces. And as it grows and you have these contacts, you're able to better make use of these AI technologies.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I just want to kind of echo a particular point that you made, and that is that I think the key point to think about is that it has to solve a business problem. I think that's exactly the point. And the way we look at this whole area of information and intelligence, which to me encompasses a range of tools. So where we come at it from is integrating smart analysts who leverage external market intelligence, who use analytics and AI and machine learning and all of those aspects, integrating technology into all of it to help you solve a particular business problem. And I think that's the fundamental point. I think that doesn't change. And I don't think that ever should change. And I'll give you a practical example of kind of how it manifests itself today is, technology and artificial intelligence and even this broader term of analytics is all the rage these days. Everybody's talking about big data, right? And when I I went into a retail client, a massive retail organization, which is in every mall in the country, which everyone knows about. And we wanted to talk to them about how they handle promotional analytics, right? So if I give you an X% off versus I do some sort of a 2-for-1 special or whatever it might be, what's the contribution impact of running those different promotions? And we typically start our conversations at the C-level. So I start this conversation, and instead of going to the chief merchandising officer or the chief marketing officer, I'm sent to the CIO's office. And my thinking is, well, why am I talking to the CIO? Not to suggest that the CIO doesn't have value. They absolutely do. They absolutely need to be involved in the conversation, particularly when there's a technology investment to be made. But at the end of the day, the problem is owned by the function, by the folks who deal with that problem and deal with customers on a day-to-day basis. So I think if you sort of take a step back from the hype of big data and analytics that everybody's talking about, which is great, because it's raising awareness for the value of what it can deliver, which is immense, and frankly, I don't think we've even tapped into a fraction of what the potential is. At the end of the day, the business has to own the problem, and that's how we should always think about this, as opposed to a technology as a sort of panacea for everything.
Yeah, I think there's a study out there where I think Gartner predicts that CMOs will own more of the technology budget over time than CIOs, right? Because for that reason that you described. So Rahil, switching over to you, right? So I know Charlie touched on this a little bit, but so why AI now, right? People have been talking about AIs forever. There are people who've done their PhDs like 30 years ago in AI, but why is AI happening now? Give us your take on it.
So my view is, I mean, if you look at, I think you mentioned, right, this idea of CIO and technology, right? A lot of the assumptions that an enterprise has is that software around data and analytics belongs in the IT department, right? But the reality is that if you think about where AI and machine learning are being utilized right now, are actually to enhance products and services or introduce services. I'll give you an example. What do you think Amazon is doing, right, when they open this retail store, and why is Kroger is going to be, looking at that very closely, right? Because there's machine learning built. Fundamentally, it's about the customer experience, right? So as a customer goes into the Amazon store, Amazon already knows who you are. You don't have to pay for anything. It knows what you picked up. That experience, and we call that engagement, right? So fundamentally, if you look at the disruption forces that are causing companies to evaluate the use of AI, is in bringing differentiated customer engagement. How my product and what it does, how my service and what it delivers is going to be better, faster, cheaper, and more intelligent than somebody else's. And the only way to do that is if the company or the product, which now belongs to the business function, does not belong in IT, right? If the product is smart enough to do that, if the service and the field people are smarter about solving problems. And the only way to do that is if now product organizations are becoming software organizations. So I've had a number of clients who we work with who've traditionally been just engineering companies, building industrial machinery or building things that consumers buy. And they're the ones, that department that comes up with the engineering is now responsible for infusing software specifically around AI and machine learning into the product itself. And if you read about the fourth industrial revolution, and many claim we are in the fourth industrial revolution, it's because this idea of embedded software, and more importantly, intelligent embedded software, and the disruption it can have in delivering differentiated customer experience is important. Now, the difference between why this wasn't there 3 years ago and why it's becoming prevalent now is because people are realizing that to bring that disruption in the differentiated customer experience, whether you're Kroger now trying to figure out what happens with retail stores, if you're an industrial equipment manufacturer that's thinking, how am I going to provide predictive maintenance? If you are a healthcare company that's thinking about how to service your patients using natural language understanding models or machine learning to predict their health, any of those organizations, the problem isn't in the idea, as many have expressed today, it's in the execution. So when you think about a product engineering function within a company, they've never dealt with building software. They don't even know how to build software. IT isn't equipped to actually working with business to do consumer-facing or customer-facing stuff. They've always done back-office stuff, right? And that's the reason why you mentioned what you mentioned. So there's this pull right now to figure out where does this function belong and how do we execute on this idea of infusing and embedding software, but more importantly, the organization change has to exist. So if a company is bringing a connected product to market, for instance, they may have never talked to a consumer before, but a consumer can now interact with their product directly. So that means they need to set up a call center. So if you don't figure out all those parts of the organization that have to come together to deliver this promise of disruption, then the whole thing doesn't work. And what's happening right now is, because of the word digital everywhere, digital transformation, one element of digital transformation is to align organization and organization's functions to the disruption. The ideas are not, the idea is not the problem, it's the execution. And AI is just getting more easy to implement, so it's becoming more easy to actually come up with the ideas.
So going back to, so I think, I'll let you, sure, go ahead. Yeah.
So I think the whole idea of, focusing on a use case, but the other, complement to that is the closer that use case is in terms of delivering revenue, the more value it is to the customer. And then the last thing is, because it's revenue oriented, if it interacts with their customers, the last piece that's really important, and I see that this happen, is the whole notion of, everybody talks about minimal viable product to get something out there to test. But the whole notion of a minimal lovable product has started to evolve. And I think that's where, like, for instance, AWS was really good, or Amazon was really good with Alexa. I mean, their natural language technology wasn't as good as Cortana or some of the other ones, but what they did was they were able to kind of very fine-tune that thing and create that experience, and Steve Jobs was amazing at that. So when you talk about minimal level products, like, not only does it function, it does this, and there's one last thing. Right? He always talks about that. So people really love it. There's an emotional catch. So when you talk about creating use cases that drive revenue, you have to have that emotional touch with the customer. And that's what people are starting to get to right now.
And that's the differentiated customer experience that I'm really talking about. I mean, there are examples, but the weird part is that even today, many enterprises still don't believe they need to do that. Like, for instance, I was just speaking with a company that is in the business of laying down pipes for gas, transporting gas, right? If you think about predictive maintenance on ensuring that you know where the gas leaks may be through the pipeline, that's hugely important, obviously, right? There's regulations and government-imposed regulations on it as well. Knowing that in real time and offering communities and cities awareness of where that may occur and when they may occur, you would imagine that's of interest, because in the end, it's all about customer experience in the end. But for them, it's like, no. My industry does, it takes me years to lay down a pipe, and we have these accustomed ways of how we do this. So we don't need that. Now, there will be some disruption that will cause them to reconsider, but you find many organizations still that, because they believe that things have worked the way they have worked, it's not important yet to change or disrupt the way consumers experience the product or service. On the other hand, I've worked with companies who make ball bearings, who make an engine that goes into a lawnmower, and the engine company is thinking, how can I become a connected product and add artificial intelligence to tell the lawn mowing company how intelligently they should be running their business.
Yep.
So on the other hand, you have companies like that are really trying to change that as well.
So let's switch gears a little bit, right? So we've talked about all the positive impact, right, that we feel AI is going to have, the emotional experience, the value. So this was an article, or the headline of an article on, I think in Vanity Fair. It says that Elon Musk's $1 billion crusade to stop the AI apocalypse, right? So there are people who are scared of this, right? They're scared, and so talk a little bit about that, and why don't we start with Omar, you, right? So give your perspective, right, on this.
So I've read, I don't think I've read the Vanity Fair article, but I've read articles around that. And, I think where he's coming from, at least my interpretation, and I'd love to hear both of your views, is I think where he's coming from is we're at an age now where things are moving so fast. Technology evolves at a rate that it's never evolved at before. And the result of that is that there are uses for the technology and the data and the insights that come from that we can't imagine. In fact, the folks who created the technology cannot necessarily imagine. And it's moving at such a rate that it's moving ahead of us. And so my first impression when I heard about Elon Musk saying that was, Terminator and Skynet. And the machines are going to take over, they're going to kill us all, and we'll all be dead. But I think where he's actually coming from is the fact that humans can think ahead and use it for nefarious purposes and create problems, kind of a bit like, and maybe this is a debatable topic, right, for some folks, but the Russians and Facebook. You're right. I mean, I don't think Mark Zuckerberg thought that was a way to utilize his platform to disrupt any element of society. In fact, he probably saw it as a way to really bring people together. Yes, promote your own ideas. That's fine. Everybody does that. But the way it was utilized. So I think where he's coming from is that. And I do agree with that point, that I think we have to get ahead of the curve a little bit. I don't know if more regulation is the answer. I mean, I don't think no regulation is the answer. But I think that's kind of the big takeaway for me, and that we're at an age where things evolve so fast, that things move ahead of us so fast, that we need folks thinking about issues from all different angles to be able to make sense of it. Charles.
So Omar, I tend to agree. I think what he's really thinking about is like things like, so how many of you guys actually have Alexa or Echo? Okay, so you know that it's constantly listening to you. So it's Big Brother, right? So it hears everything that's in every single room. So that's kind of scary, So all of a sudden, if you have like the federal government that decides to this, hey, we want to get in. Now Amazon's going to like push them off, but that's a big problem. Now, how many of you guys have accepted like what's that called? The we would like to notify you of your location on your app. You download an app. How many of you guys have kind of accepted that? Right. So now they can actually, so within your app, they'll know who you are, because if you actually think about your phone, it spends at least maybe 8 to 12 hours at a specific address, right? So they can actually be able to correlate all that stuff and be able to do that. Now, if you can link all these things, which is very easy to do, then you can do some amazing things that's very intrusive from a personal standpoint. So I think that's what he's thinking about. That being said, now, with the pace of technology, I mean, the whole Skynet, I think, is so far off, but at the same time, in terms of creating some level of intelligence by being able to track different pieces, is not that far off. So that's the part that I think scares people. It scares me personally.
Good points. But I think one of the elements that was discussed when that article came out was this idea of the algorithms being able to think like humans as well. So there was this discussion happening as well. And I think generally speaking, right, I mean, people who are, so there's this other notion in AI called deep learning, right? Most enterprises are so far from that state, right? The reality is they can't even agree that they need some kind of an intelligent product, let alone how it thinks, right? So they are very far away from it. But that doesn't mean that companies in Silicon Valley are not thinking about it or doing something about it. I think the mainstream enterprises are far from considering or adding it to the portfolio of, or embedding it into the products that we're talking about. Most companies are trying to figure out, for instance, one of the companies that we're working with right now, they provide plant maintenance. If you have a tree that's questionable or it's not feeling well, they'll come in and treat it, right? It may take 6 months, a year to treat the trees. But a simple thing as a consumer at home, a property owner, taking a photograph of that tree and the algorithm being smart enough to recognize what kind of tree it is, right? Knowing that it's actually a sick tree, and taking intelligence around the world about what insects, may be occurring at that particular location, the weather and all those things, and being able to convey to the property owner that yes, we are 80%, 90% confident that this is a sick tree because of these reasons, and that we as a company can come and help you, right? Most people are still grappling with that, let alone deep learning and trying to mimic human beings, right? So we're still far away from those.
Can I just share
Yep.
on your Alexa story?
Sure.
So it's this funny thing that my son, who's 17 years old, taught me, is if you go to Alexa and you say, "Hey Alexa, is the CIA listening to my conversation?" It doesn't answer. It turns itself off.
It doesn't lie.
So I'm a brown boy. I kind of expect that, but I wonder if that happens everywhere. So
Can I add one more thing? I don't know if you know that Google and obviously Microsoft had their own AI application. In China, the Google application, they actually had to shut everything down, because when you actually, in Chinese, if you ask and say, well, tell me about the Chinese government, and they'll say, it is a corrupt government. I mean, so people were really, and what happened remember, these machine learning is all based on context. So when people are ranting or doing research, or people are looking at Google and saying, why is the Chinese government so corrupt, or why are they doing this? It was making these connections that's what they're thinking about, so they thought the answer should be that. Or I don't know if you've done a Google search, and there's this one woman that actually was pinging about this and said, she's an African-American woman, and she was like a doctor, a PhD, and a professor, and she was wondering, I wonder what would happen if I, did a Google search. So she did a Google search, something came up, and an ad popped up, and the ad popped up and said, do you want to find out the criminal records for whatever her name was? Because she had an African-American name, and it shocked her. And then she realized that basically what they were doing was, when they had a certain type of name that they're looking for, they automatically assumed that it was for criminal records, So it's stuff like that just gets so misconstrued, which is kind of scary.
Okay, so I promised Haris that we were going to let the audience participate, and we have not done that. So sorry about that. All right. So with that, let's open it up for questions, right? And we have a mic, so if you can pass that around. Okay.
Hello. So we have a very successful company. It's AHS Consulting. We consult for freight forwarders. So I teach people how to deliver freight point 1 to point 2, by using software. Okay. Now we have incubated another company which is called iCard. It is a virtual business card solution, and it uses QR code technology, where you put in your information, you sign up, and when you update your information, it updates it for the rest of the people who are connected with you. So QR code, I feel still we're behind in times in the US with the QR code technology, let alone artificial intelligence. So if you guys can speak about how the US economy is working, because I went to China, and in China, everything is with a QR code. WeChat is everything in WeChat, which is what they use, is with the QR code. You rent bicycles, which the government has all over China, which you pay with a QR code. And over here, we are behind in times. I don't know how to get this company, the second company that we have, to the next level. So we have the funding. We just need, how do we get people to ditch their paper business cards in this day and age and get to where the technology, this savvy way of actually getting connected to people?
So I think, yeah. I think one of the ways you can think, I think in the US, if one technology is really taking off, I think it's NFC, near field communications, right? So if you look at Apple Pay or Samsung Pay or Google Pay, they're all using NFC readers or NFC tags in your phone, and then there are NFC readers in retail stores, for instance, right? And and my watch actually has an NFC reader, so my Samsung Pay account is connected to that. When I check out, I just tap my phone or my watch, right? That could be an area where you should consider, because rather than thinking of building a QR code, maybe you build an app that takes advantage of inbuilt, right, NFC readers in many of these devices that already exist out there. And that will allow you to actually, people to talk to. Why can't I just talk from watch to watch, right, and share information, for instance?
It is an app. It's free of charge on mobile phones right now. It's been live for a year. We have 1,500 users, and we haven't done any conventional marketing. But the issue is where I get emails from people, how do I even go and do a general search for somebody's name? How do I go and edit my profile on here? And these are just, I mean, it's so easy. Like, you just go in there, click on your picture.
Can I suggest a question? Because I think you're making a great point, and I think it's a great conversational topic that we can probably have afterwards, because we were trying to stay focused a little bit on analytics and AI. It's a little beyond that, right? So if it's okay with you, we'll have a social hour afterwards that we can talk more about it. Is that good? Yeah. Okay, so can we switch to other questions that are more analytics and AI specific? The rest of the room?
I think AI was more like, QR code is still backwards. So my question was, how do we get to AI if we can't get past QR code technology? Do you understand what I'm saying now?
Yeah.
So it is related.
Yeah, so let me just, one of the things that I found was, and this is as a management consultant, whenever you need change, people think about, here's a carrot. And what I found was that you need the carrot and the stick. And that actually switches everybody over. So I remember when we would try to reorg something, we always have a public praise and a public hanging. And then everybody in the middle flips over. So I think that's, in some respects, that needs to happen. So a couple of facts are really interesting. Most people don't realize that China has overtaken the total amount of retail volume over the US. We think the US is like, we're number one. Chinese will get there at some point. China has surpassed the amount of retail volume relative to the US. That's a stick, get on this. And then I think, from a carrot standpoint, you have to think about the other part that we also realized was that there are changes happening, and it's on small places, really highlight that. And one of the key things that we highlighted to our clients was that in adopting new technology, when there's a new format, they actually buy all the equipment all at once. Whereas all the other people, they're replacing it one every 7 to 10 years. Install base issue? Exactly. So it's basically new install versus install base issue. Microsoft used to go through this all the time, right? They look at the install base. So if you highlight the fact that this is a small trend that's tipping up, but by the way, the average purchase is 7 to 10 times that of the other customers, then people get really excited. That's a carrot.
Yeah, I have a question. Two questions related to each other, which is basically how saturated is the market of AI? Everyone is talking about analytics, AI. As a startup, you wonder, it's like, can you make it through? I mean, those big guys like IBM, TIPCO, you name it. Everyone has their own gig, and your idea is doable in their realm easily. So how can you counterpart that?
One of the ways is to focus, again, finding that problem, right? IBM is not solving every single problem. They're focusing on building platforms. So, for instance, I have a friend of mine who started an AI company that takes years and years of satellite imagery, right? Years of satellite imagery, and then uses AI to understand what crop is growing, what crops were growing based on those images, and also to understand the water saturation in the soil just by looking at the satellite imagery. Now, once you analyze that data and you see over the years what crop has been growing on a farm year after year after year, the insights from that data are very valuable, right? Now, who can you sell it to? You can sell it to commodity traders, right, who will pay a lot of money for that. You can sell it to the farmers themselves who want to have a better business. So I'm just giving you an example. It's not about IBM or big guys. It's about really trying to figure out what is that problem that exists. And AI probably has a mechanism to solve it. And more importantly, the platforms that exist today, like for instance, some of the data scientists that work in our team, 4 years ago would take 6 months to build a model. Today, they can build a model and train it and actually see results in 2 weeks, right? So you can actually solve problems faster is what I'm trying to say. You don't have to spend years trying to do this, but you still need a problem and understand it really well.
So let me just say a couple of things just to add to that. I think that's exactly right. You have to find a problem to solve. Don't try and be like the universal solution for absolutely everything, but find one issue and do it really, really well. But let me say just two things, if I can sort of maybe take a step back to entrepreneurial 101, if I can use that term. And that is, first of all, in the whole analytics, and I use analytics as kind of the catch-all phrase. Yes, there's a ton of competition. Yes, there's a lot going on. I don't think anything's saturated. I don't think companies have figured out a fraction of what the potential is here. Not at all. And on top of that, technology is evolving at such a rapid rate that I think that there are things that we haven't even imagined and thought about that are there as opportunities. But the more fundamental thing that I would say is, especially if you're starting out and thinking about business, is the fact that there's competition is exactly why you should get into the business. It validates the fact that there is a market. It validates the fact that there are issues and problems to be resolved. Now you go figure out how to get that solved. You find a better way to do it than how anybody else is doing it, and you be more innovative in terms of how you bring that solution to market. And by the way, innovation doesn't necessarily mean the absolute best product. I think we'd agree that Apple had a better computer than the Apple platform was a better one than the PCs were. But look who won the market. Now, it's a different thing now, right? But the reason things have changed now is because Steve Jobs, frankly, kind of changed the whole platform and ecosystem aspect that was there. But that's a whole separate conversation. My point is, the fact that there's competition is a non-issue. Go after the market and solve the problem really well.
So I also like to add one more thing. You know, one of the questions I think was between your question was, where are we in terms of the whole technology evolution? And I would say that we're still just moving over from the innovator to the early adopters. I mean, we're very early on, because for AI to make sense, you know, what you have to do is you have to actually have a lot of data, and you have to have patterns, and you learn from that, and it grows over time. So when you think about AI relative to like human terms, I think the current stage is, it's like toddlers. Because we're just starting to make sense of like, that's food. Ooh, yeah, I'm tired. I want to go to sleep. We're not even at like, hey, you know, what I want to do, you know, what do I want to do tonight? You know, we're more like, hey, I'm hungry. Let's, you know, I got some information. We're at that simple level. So there's a ton of opportunity ahead. We're actually in the very early stages. So focus on the use cases that drive the most amount of value. And it could be like hedge funds, you know? It's like, let's take a look at the data and, you know, and figure out how we make money out of that.
All right, one last question, because we've got like 3 minutes. Go ahead, Kevin. Yeah. Can you get him a mic? Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Given your consulting backgrounds, you must have seen various industries and various places where machine learning, for example, has been applied. I have always been curious, given a particular use case, if you have found a use case, and you did mention a 2-week period also sometimes that you can be successful in, but given the last 10 years or so, what has been an kind of average time in which you have seen commercial algorithms for machine learning mature and deliver results repeatable, let's say over a 90-95% with the accuracy? I'm just asking this question for the benefit of youngsters. If they have identified a use case, what kind of a time horizon should they plan that, okay, I will develop an algorithm, and obviously they have to create the breadth of data and the length of data that you mentioned. What is a rough time period? Is it 6 months? A year, 3 years?
I think he'll answer that. I mean, in the old days, it was like months. You know, it was like, you know, you'd basically do a test, you know, you'd do iteration of tests of like 3 to 6 months, and then you learn from it, you study it and retrain it and so forth. Now it's a matter of weeks. And the reason is that the amount of data that's available is just amazing. Not just what I would call structured data, but you get a variety of unstructured data that people are starting to work in, and there's methods and patterns and so forth. So it's a matter of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, you know, the industry momentum, if you were to think about what industries and what use cases are really flourishing, yeah, one you know, I look at, you know, what is the you know, low-hanging fruit, right? In most organizations, it's predictive maintenance, right? So think about aerospace, think about industrial machinery, think about factories, and there's a lot of them around here, right? Think about think about the water cooler out there, right? That needs to make sure the compressor works in there. Think about these lights. Think about the projector. All of those things that people have built over the years, and just being able to smartly predict when they will not work and why, right? In what case, and offering a service that allows you to actually monetize that. That right now is the low-hanging fruit everybody's going after. Then the next one, it really is differentiated customer experience, right? So pay-per-use is a great example. So if you want to introduce a product called pay-per-use or even pay-per-outcome. So think about if you've ever had our filters in our refrigerators, right? But in India and in other countries, right, they don't have refrigerators with filters in them, right? They actually have to buy a separate filter at home that filters the water and makes it clean. So now imagine, rather than the company that makes that filter, rather than asking you to pay for that filter, says, hey, if I clean 1,000 liters of water, you pay me 1,000 rupees, right? That's pay-per-outcome. So those models are actually emerging right now because of AI and because of machine learning, and people are exploring that right now, right? But predictive maintenance, low-hanging fruit, it's happening in almost every manufacturing type of place right now. So.
Could I also add, one example? Let's take one example: hedge funds, right? So now in hedge funds, the old model was people would sit there and spend a lot of time thinking about all the inefficiencies that do back tests and so forth. Now there's a company, and there's actually a couple of companies. One of my friends' companies is, let's say, CloudQuant, and what they're basically saying is, if you guys have an idea of making some money, using analytics, we will take that analytics, write it in Python, take a couple of weeks. We'll actually back test it for you, forward test it for you, and if you think it's good, we'll put $10 to $15 million against it, and you'll get 10% of the earnings. Yeah, so you guys want to be hedge fund people? So that's an example.
So
that's one example.
That's the ultimate monetization of AI, right? So, okay, well, I think we're out of time. I thank the panel. Right? All of you guys have been great. Thank you for participating, and we'll continue the conversation afterwards.